Everybody, should you learn Node.js for 2017? Now, I'm recording this in December 2016, but I figure since 2017 is about 28 days away, we're going to talk about 2017. And again, like everything else I talk about, when I talk about should you learn this language or that language or this framework or that framework, it all comes down to two things. A, it comes down to the type of work that you want to do, and B, whether or not there is those type of jobs available to you in your area. Now, Node.js, just in case you don't know, is a server-side engine. It's an engine, JavaScript engine, an adaptation rather of Google's JavaScript engine, if I recall. And it's super high performance, super fast, and it's used in asynchronous application development. Basically, if you need to really build a fast messaging system, this is where Node will shine. That said, beware that Node and server-side JavaScript. Now, Node, you write Node with JavaScript, of course. Node and server-side JavaScript is still a moving target, so a lot of the libraries are experimental, they're changing a lot, so you could spend a big amount of time in configurations and so forth dealing with conflicting packages and that kind of stuff. I had long conversations with a good friend of mine who wrote a core part of their app with Node, so he gave me a lot of information. So what it all comes down to is that it is still a moving target. It's super fast and performant, but it's something that I wouldn't necessarily jump into if I wanted to become a freelance web developer. Again, PHP is still by far and away is king. Node is much more performant than PHP or several other environments, Java, definitely Ruby on Rails, Python, Django. It's more performant at runtime, but these other frameworks, whether it be Python Django, PHP Laravel, and many, if not all, of the other PHP frameworks, Ruby Rails, Java Spring, etc., etc., etc. They may be not as performant, but they're much more mature, much more stable, and so easier in a sense to get involved with it. So the final question I want to bring up is the major attractiveness in that if you use Node.js, and perhaps a framework that sits on top of Node.js, something called Express, which is kind of an MVC framework that sits on top of Node. Again, I have not used these. I'm just telling you what I've heard from people and did some looking around. I'm giving you my perspective as a coder who's been coding from the 90s. Again, these are technologies that really only give you an advantage if you have an app that requires really fast, high-performant messaging. And most of us don't need that. In that case, I would poke around if you're interested in Node and start playing around with it a little bit here and there so you have an idea of what it can do and how it works. But I think in terms of most apps these days, I would still go with one of the more established frameworks at this point in time. As I said, PHP Django, Python Django, PHP Laravel, two top choices. If I was doing Java, and I've talked about Java in other videos, Java Spring, etc., Ruby on Rails, simply because Node still, it offers advantages only in a very small slice, those high-performant apps that you may want to build. And you won't see those advantages expressed in most applications. I mean, it's just kind of like having a super fast CPU on your computer. Unless you're using that CPU, you're pushing it hard to do some heavy duty processing, you won't see the difference between, a CPU that's at 2.7 gigahertz versus a 2.2 gigahertz CPU. Same thing with Node and Node.js versus, say, PHP Laravel or Python Django. So yeah, final attractiveness. The thing, people kind of like the idea of using Node because it's all JavaScript, which means when you're using JavaScript, you write JavaScript in the web browser, that's where JavaScript traditionally runs, is within the web browser. You have one programming language rather than having two. Like if you do work with PHP and Laravel, for instance, you're going to be writing JavaScript for your web browser because PHP doesn't run in a web browser, and then you're going to be using PHP often enough to communicate with you're going to be using JavaScript often to communicate with PHP on the server side, or using JavaScript in the web browser to communicate with Python on the server side, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's the thing. It may sound like writing JavaScript on the client, meaning the web browser, and writing on the server gives you a certain advantage in terms of the fact you're only using one programming language. What you're going to find if you get deeper into programming is that the differences between the languages is not the complexity. It's the differences between the frameworks around the languages that makes languages harder to jump into. So for the most part. So I don't see a significant advantage in having JavaScript on the client and JavaScript on the server. There could be some advantage, but it's not significant, because if you've learned any programming language, you know that to jump from, say, Python or PHP and then to learn JavaScript, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. The hard part about learning JavaScript is understanding the JavaScript DOM, the document object model, and how JavaScript is used to manipulate the DOM. And that's about it. So there you go. Node, you only need it for high-performance apps. If you're looking to get a lot of work, check to see if there's a lot of Node demand in your area, and depending, they may need you to have more than just Node experience. They may need you in Node jobs to have a comp sci degree. I don't know. And also check to see what kind of work you want to do, because if you're inclined to freelancing, like so many people who watch this channel are, then Node's not going to get you any jobs. It's still going to be by far and away PHP with WordPress, PHP with Joomla, PHP with Drupal, but WordPress being most dominant. So there you go. Node's cool. Moving target. You understand. I hope this is useful to you. Ciao.